Now, new figures released within the last few minutes reveal more children than ever are being referred to social services in England. The NSPCC's How Safe Are Our Children report found that 570,800 children were referred to social services in England in 2013 to 14. That's the highest number since the data was first collected in 2010. It comes as the charity also released police data showing that 85 child sexual abuse crimes were reported every day after a dramatic spike in reports of abuse. More than 31,000 claims of sexual offences against children, including rape and assault, were made to forces in England and Wales in 2013-14. Of those, 3,000 involved children of 5 and under. Well, we've brought together a survivor of sexual abuse, a teacher, a social worker and a former police officer, and the NSPCC to discuss why these figures are going up. Is it as a result of better reporting or publicity surrounding historical sex abuse cases? And when people report cases, is there enough support for them? Welcome all of you. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. John Brown from the NSPCC, let's begin with you before I introduce everybody else. In terms of the figures, they're pretty staggering, aren't they?
They are staggering figures. I mean, as far as the sexual abuse figures are concerned, we have been doing a Freedom of Information Act request for a number of years now, and this jump of over a third in recorded sexual offences by the police is both alarming and pretty staggering, actually. I think it's still, unfortunately, the tip of the iceberg. So much sexual abuse continues to be unreported and undetected. So I think as the years go on, we're likely to see a continued increase. But I think to an extent that's good news, in the sense if we're going to get to a better sense of the overall scale of the problem, which at the end of the day we think is a public health problem within the UK. And then more generally, our House Safe report, we've got our two-day conference starting today here in London, shows, you know, the significant increase in workload that children's services, social services up and down the country are having to deal with. Well,
let's broaden this out with everybody then. Also with us, Jim Gamble. Hello to you, former Chief Police Officer and now the chair of a Safeguarding Children's Board in London. We've got Emma Howard. Good morning to you, child protection social worker. Susanna Faithful, thanks for coming on the programme, an abuse survivor and founder of the Aurora Health Foundation, who's obviously waived your right to anonymity. And we've got Andrew Hampton, who's a head teacher from Thorpe Hall School. I wonder what you, as a former Chief Police Officer, Jim Gamble, what you ascribe to this rise in the number of cases being reported to the police?
Well, I think in the first instance it's good work done by the Metropolitan Police and others under Operation U-Tree, and the partnership they had with the NSPCC meant that that whole approach was very victim-survivor focused. I think that's great, and I really welcome the increase, and I hope it continues. My issue is when I listened to one of your earlier interviews where a government minister saying blaming recession on the former government, is actually, when we look at the situation we're in, increased reports of child sexual exploitation, and we've lost 17,000 police officers in the last few years. We've lost as many support staff, and that trend is set to continue.
Okay, well,
so with demand going up, I don't think we're going to have the resources to meet that demand, and that's a critical problem.
All right, well, who else thinks that is an issue?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're a really small charity. We've been going 9 years. We've put all our money into what we do. We do a frontline service. As a survivor myself, I'm just appalled how many people we have to put on our waiting list because we cannot afford to see them. And I think it's the resources.
What are they waiting for? Therapy or
they're
other
waiting
support?
They're waiting for specialist support and therapy. And, you know, we are very strong on the need for frontline services to also have clinical supervision as well, because you get a degree of secondary traumatic stress as well for hearing such vile things. And a lot of our team are survivors themselves. So we've got,
Emma, in terms of social workers, I cannot imagine what the pressure is like on social services at the moment.
Well, I mean, it's always been pressured, but in the current climate, economically and in terms of the workload that people are dealing with, it's a very, very difficult time. I think in terms of why there are more reports, all you have to do is look at the media and you can see that there are more sympathetic reporting of sexual abuse, so people feel a little bit more confident that when they do report things that they're going to be believed. And I think Jim's right, in U-Tree did start that off. I think the Metropolitan Police did a very, very good job there. That has kind of snowballed. But And whilst there are pockets of good practice in terms of dealing with that, those reporting around the country, the experience and the expertise tends to be focused in specialist teams. It's not your people in the front door who your children are going to be talking to first. It's not your teachers, it's not your frontline social workers, it's not your frontline police officers, it's the people in those specialist teams. So quite often children are getting a very poor response from those first professionals that they're talking to, which puts them off from continuing through that process. So we need to make sure that rather than cutting back on budgets for very, very vulnerable people, that we're investing in that so that that expertise comes out of those specialist teams and is across the board.
Andrew, from a head teacher's point of view, you know, because of the publicity surrounding the historical sexual abuse cases, because of better recording by the police, what does that impact on schools, on teachers, on your staff, on you?
There's tremendous pressure in schools around safeguarding, and to start with, we are, you know, very, very heavily regulated as a sector, and sometimes, to be honest, that can take the eye off the ball because you're so concerned about inspectors finding some chink in your policy that actually you're not necessarily concerned with actually listening. So my experience is that we need to try to make schools really genuinely listening schools, and therefore...
But I mean, if a child discloses something which raises alarm bells, there is, you know, there is practice. There is,
teachers know what to do. Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Teachers know exactly what to do, and they're very heavily trained in that, and that's where the regulations do kick in. But Emma's right. You know, that's at the end of the day, it's going to be that individual teacher and how they deal with that. I think it's very important that schools are therefore run with respect and compassion at the core of their values. I think that's an incredibly important part.
Well, you could say that about all services, wouldn't you, actually?
But often children don't necessarily say.
No,
it's for a teacher or someone to actually ask them, you know, and then do something with that information.
Looking out for those little amber flags of
absolutely. I know as a survivor
behaviour.
myself, I was very quiet, you know, and then I had lots of exuberance, you know. If you looked at it now, you'd see that was happening, but nobody asked me.
If you look at the pressure on services, particularly in children's services and the police, they're very pressured to come to an understanding about what a child, what a family needs within a very short space of time. Now that's, you know, possibly quite good.
Well, what is the time limit then?
Well, you need to have an understanding within around 10 days of whether or not you're going to do a more intensive piece of work with a family. If you're talking about the process of disclosure of sexual abuse, it just does not fit into those timescales.
Yeah. What would you say?
And of course, as well as pressure at the front end, at the kind of intake and assessment stage, there's a huge pressure once the abuse has been established, once it's been identified, and then the help for the children and young people after that just isn't there. Our estimate at the NSPCC is that there, at any one time in the UK, there are 50,000 children who have experienced abuse and exploitation and aren't getting the help that they need. So we do need government to take a really strong lead and recognise that children and young people need this help, they need this therapy at the appropriate time, as well as support through the court.
That's pressure on absolutely, it's got to be specialised.
It's got to be specialised.
But that's pressure on the NHS, which we already know is under pressure and is having to prioritise in all sorts of ways.
Not just the NHS, Victoria, certainly child and adolescent mental health services can be playing their role, local authorities, and there are some really good specialist voluntary organisations, so the NSPCC and others who provide therapeutic help and support, but that does need to be extended, and we can't have this postcode lottery. We can't have this situation where if your child's ill or injured, you would expect them to be able to go along to the GP, go to hospital, get assessed, get diagnosed and get treated. That's not the case with sexual abuse, and that's appalling.
But we do have a postcode lottery, and therein lies part of the problem. And people talk in rhetoric. I've heard government say we can't just throw money at it. It's about investing money in the right place at the right time. And because we can't manage the overwhelming numbers of survivors, we need to do something about educating and empowering young people whilst they're in school so that we can cut short their journey to abuse or the journey they suffer through abuse. And that's why in schools I think whole school training is important. It's sometimes the dinner ladies or the other staff in there who actually see a child whose demeanour's changed. They're not laughing and joking the way they once did. They're treating their technology slightly differently. And it's about making people aware and making it everybody's business. Everybody will have a story after the fact, when someone is arrested, when something's gone wrong and it's been discovered. And my question for them is, why, if you felt that way, didn't you raise the alert, didn't you raise an alarm? So people have all got to play a part.
It's too late.
Sorry, on that, well,
it's too late.
But just on that point, Jim, the child whose demeanour has changed. Well, primary school kids are up and down the whole time. Yeah. I've got 2 of them. I mean, do you really mean you want all professionals to start speaking up when the child's demeanour's changed?
They're up and down all the time. They're not down all the time.
Right.
So when you get a child whose pallor has changed, when you get a child who's on their phone every other minute, but now their phone's tucked away, and when they do get it out, they go somewhere in private to read it, you'll know from the tone of their voice that it's changed. You will see that. Then you want to be asking them a question. You want to be directing them to someone who can support them. And the problem is, every child now, you know, in the UK, above a certain age, maybe 8, 9 or 10, they're engaged in social media. So, as the NSPCC report on neglect and maltreatment said, you know, last year, they need to be seen, they need to be heard, they need to be helped, but seen in the context of their life at home, the context of their life at school, but clearly the context of their life online, where all of these telltale signs will be. And the truth is, it can be seen. We're good at seeing it after the fact. What we're not doing is educating and empowering frontline staff with the skills and abilities to do it, because all of these things are seen as a novelty or different.
And we know what the warning signs are. We do. I think we are able to
tell our audience now, because there'll be, you know, plenty of parents watching.
So for example, if your child is sort of the older child is suddenly got a new friendship group, they're going out, they can't explain where they're going, they're coming back with a new friendship group, unexplained gifts, a change in their appearance, quite a radical change in their appearance. All those sorts of things can be potentially warning signs. We shouldn't leap to conclusions.
We should also remember that most sexual abuse comes from within the family.
Indeed, it does.
So it's not going to be the parents looking out.
And that's because that's one of the problems. We've begun saying interfamilial abuse is over here, the internet is over there, and we've got CSE, FGM and other forms in the middle. Actually, the people who are downloading abusive images tonight and looking at them live in real homes. They're in that home. So what I'm saying is we need to... People have often said we need to stop talking about the internet and start talking about interfamilial abuse. What we need to identify is the means by which we know a person within a home or within a job in an institution where trust comes as a given, where that individual has demonstrated a propensity to engage with children sexually. And that's why I think some of the messages that go out are so damaging and so dangerous.
Yeah. And of course, I kind of agree with that. Certainly from a practice issue, we were talking. It took us a long time to get parents to understand that that children aren't abused by the man in the dirty Mac down the park. That it's somebody at home. And then when we understood a little bit more about how internet offenders work, we're trying to tell parents that actually children can be abused in their bedroom with nobody else there. So actually I think we need to be really careful about saying this is how children are abused.
Sure. Okay.
You know, just because if we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, we're not in a position to be able to make those kind of statements.
I think also there's an emphasis on male perpetration, whereas so much of what we see at Aurora, and I myself was abused by my mother, so who acted independently, so it's nothing like the profiles that you read about. And I think that's an area also that needs to be looked at. I think it's not about having a witch hunt, but I think, where has it gone, that feeling, that gut feeling, you feel that something's not right, something's is not there, with that child, something's happening. I think it is about using everybody, not just teachers, but the people who, dinner ladies, whatever, using as much as you can, because if I'd have been able to form a relationship, with someone, maybe I could have said something, or maybe they would have asked me the right questions, or felt that I could trust.
And part of that comes from the kind of societal norms about sex and sexuality as well. Children, adults are so heavily influenced by what they see in the world around them, whether that's their peers, whether that's the media, whether that's something that they're reading, and that has an impact on what they see as normal and isn't. And that's going to have a real impact on their ability to disclose when something's happening.
And what I'd like to sorry, Emma, what I'd like to say as well is that at Aurora we see the adult children, so we see people from 18 over, and what happens is that people will come to us and they've not had any help, so once they're 16 or whatever, social services, because of a lot of the cuts as well, there's those 2 years where they're not. So we'll give phone support, we'll give whatever we can and work with agencies. But it's resources. It's no point talking about all these figures, if we don't do something. And I think that we could have internet, you could have cafes, you could have, let's get people together, let's have more of a community thing and put some resources in there.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming on the programme. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. Still to come before 11, Chris Evans decides to take on Top Gear after all, but is he the right person to steer the show to success?